Mireia Arteaga stood at the window of the spacious auditorium, watching the last students take their seats. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the ancient university building, creating bizarre shadows on the worn parquet. She slowly ran her hand over the wooden pulpit, feeling the familiar scratches, silent witnesses to years of teaching. Her navy blue, austere dress was perfect for a lecture, but today it felt especially heavy. The last few weeks had not been easy for her. Sleepless nights had left subtle shadows under her eyes, which she had carefully masked with makeup. "Good morning, honored students." Her voice sounded confident and calm as always, despite her inner tension. Today, we will continue our study of the influence of socio-economic factors on the development of contemporary Latin American literature. The audience instantly fell silent. Mireia looked around at the rows of young faces, all looking at her with genuine interest. In the front row, Manuela, one of the most capable students, had already opened her notebook, preparing to take notes on every word. Next to her, Joaquin, a perpetually late but incredibly talented young man, was on time this time and even managed to get all the necessary materials. The lecture went on as usual. Mireia methodically revealed the topic, skillfully weaving historical facts and literary analogies into the narrative. Her natural ability to captivate the audience didn't fail even today. The students were attentive to every word, occasionally raising their hands for questions. "Professor Arteaga," came a voice from the back rows, "do you think modern authors could reach the same level as the classics of the last century?" Mireia smiled, noting the depth of the question. It was moments like this that helped distract her from her personal worries, reminding her why she had chosen this profession. After the lecture, a few students lingered to discuss additional questions. Mireia patiently answered each one, trying to pay attention to everyone. She was especially touched when Manuela held out a small paper bag of homemade cookies. "You look a little tired, Professor," the girl said thoughtfully. "My grandmother always says that sweets help lift your spirits." Mireia gladly accepted the gift, feeling warmth spill into her chest at this simple act of caring. It was moments like this that helped keep her going when things got especially hard at home. After class, she went to a small cafe near the university, where Camila Benavides was waiting for her. Her friend looked elegant as always in her beige suit, her short hair styled in a simple but stylish style. "You were up again?" Camila asked instead of greeting, looking at her friend carefully. Mireia lowered herself into a chair, placing her bag next to her. A waiter immediately came to their table, and she machine-ordered a black coffee without sugar. "Matthias is back late again," she finally uttered as the waiter stepped away. "Said it was an important presentation, but, Camila, I don't know. Something's changed. It's like he's getting farther and farther away from me." Camila covered her friend's hand with her own. "Maybe we should talk to him. I've tried. He either brushes it off or gets annoyed. Says I'm exaggerating everything, that he just has a lot of work to do." Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter bringing their order. Mireia wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep through the porcelain. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee was slightly soothing. "You know," she continued after a pause, "sometimes I feel like I don't know him at all. We've been living together for 8 years, but it feels like he's turning into a complete stranger." Camila listened intently, taking an occasional sip of her herbal tea. Her dark eyes expressed genuine concern. In the evening, upon returning home, Mireia caught Matthias at his laptop in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, absorbed in his work, not even noticing her arrival. It was only when she turned on the light that he looked up. "Ah, you're home already," he said without much enthusiasm. "How was your day?" "Fine." Mireia walked to the kitchen, starting to sort through the grocery bags habitually. "You have a lot of work to do." "Yeah, I have a report to finish by tomorrow morning." He stared at the screen again. Mireya slowly put the groceries on the shelves, trying not to make any noise. Each movement was difficult, the fatigue accumulating not so much physically as emotionally. Once their evenings had been filled with conversations, dinners together, plans for the future. Now the silence of the apartment was broken only by the clatter of laptop keys. She began to prepare dinner, mechanically chopping vegetables for the salad. Behind her back, Matthias answered the phone several times, speaking in a low voice. Before, he had always talked about his work problems, consulting with her. Now, however, every conversation was shrouded in some inexplicable mystery. "Will you have dinner?" she asked, setting out the plates. "No, I had a snack at the office," he replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. "And I have more work to do." Mireya silently put one plate back in the cupboard, sat down at the table alone, looking at the empty chair across from her. She felt completely alone in the huge apartment, despite her husband's presence. Later, lying in bed, she listened to the sounds in the living room. Matthias was still working, or pretended to be working. Lately, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. Sleep wouldn't come. Her thoughts were jumbled, creating a kaleidoscope of disturbing images in her head. Something was subtly changing in their lives, and that change frightened her more and more. The morning was unusually cold for Uruguay. Mireya shivered as she entered the university building. The ancient walls, usually pleasantly cool on hot days, seemed frozen solid today. She adjusted her woolen scarf as she walked down the humming corridor. The students were already waiting for her in the auditorium. Today, they were to discuss the influence of political regimes on the development of 20th century literature. Mireya began laying out the materials on the lectern, noticing out of the corner of her eye Manuela diligently wiping her fogged glasses and Joaquin trying to discreetly finish his coffee. "Good morning," she began habitually, but her voice was interrupted by the sharp ringing of a cell phone. Mireya frowned. She always turned the sound off before class. Pulling out her phone, she saw an unfamiliar number. Normally, she wouldn't answer such calls, but something made her apologize to the students and step out into the hallway. "Señora Arteaga?" An unfamiliar male voice sounded alarmed. "This is Dr. Ramirez from the Central Hospital speaking. Your father was admitted to us an hour ago with a massive heart attack." Mireya felt the air around her grow thick and heavy. The fingers clutching the phone trembled visibly. "How is he?" Her voice sounded muffled, as if from far away. "The condition is steadily grave. We're doing everything we can, but you'd better get here." Back in the auditorium, she mechanically gathered her things. The students watched her in silence, sensing that something serious had happened. "I apologize," Mireya tried to speak evenly. "Class is canceled. My father is in the hospital." Manuela immediately jumped up from her seat. "Professor Arteaga, how about I call you a cab?" Mireya nodded gratefully, unable to find the strength to refuse the help. While Manuela called the cab service, the other students silently packed their bags, casting worried glances at the professor. The drive to the hospital seemed endless. Mireya stared at the buildings whizzing by outside the window, trying to gather her thoughts. Her father had always been a pillar of strength, a man of indomitable will and good health. The news of his illness seemed unreal. The hospital smelled of medicine and disinfection. The bright light of the fluorescent lamps mercilessly picked out every detail: the worn linoleum, the peeling paint on the walls, the tired faces of the nurses. Mireya walked up to the front desk, called out her father's last name. Fernando Arteaga lay in the intensive care unit. Many wires and tubes entangled his body. Monitors showed some graphs and figures. His face, usually commanding and energetic, now seemed drained and gray. "Daddy," Mireya gently took his hand, careful not to touch the IV. Fernando opened his eyes weakly. "Mireya, You shouldn't have come. It's just a little glitch. Stop it, she tried to smile. You know I've always been a daddy's girl. Dr. Ramirez showed up a few minutes later, a tall, graying man with a tired but attentive look. He took Mireya aside, explaining the situation in medical terms that hid a simple and terrible truth. Her father's condition was critical. The following days became an endless wait. Mireya practically never left the hospital, going out only to shower and change her clothes. Matthias visited them several times, bringing food and clean clothes, but each time he left in a hurry, citing work. On the third day, his father's condition improved a little. He was even able to sit up in bed and talk to his daughter. "You're not taking care of yourself at all," he grumbled, looking at Mireya's gaunt face. "Go home. Get some proper rest." "I'm fine," she adjusted the blanket on his bed. "Better tell me, how are you feeling?" Fernando tried to make a joke but was interrupted by a coughing fit. Mireya helped him drink some water, noticing anxiously how his hands were trembling. On the fifth day, his condition worsened dramatically. The doctors fussed around him, sending Mireya into the corridor. She sat in a hard hospital chair, clutching her cell phone in her hands. Matthias wasn't answering the phone. Camila had arrived unannounced, bringing a thermos of hot soup and a fresh sweater. "You're not alone," she said, hugging her friend. "I'm always here for you." At night, Mireya dozed in an uncomfortable chair next to her father's bed, flinching with every beep of the instruments. The nurses brought her coffee, shaking their heads understandingly. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, even brought her a blanket from the resident's room. On the seventh day, my father regained consciousness after another seizure. His voice was barely audible. "Mireya, my girl, I'm sorry to make you worry so much. Daddy, please save your strength." She gently wiped the sweat from his forehead. "No, listen," he tried to squeeze her hand. "I have to tell you, be careful. Not everyone can be trusted." "What are you talking about?" But he fell back into oblivion, leaving his daughter distraught. His words echoed in her head, mingling with the monotonous beeping of the medical equipment. Matthias showed up in the evening, bringing a bag of fruit and a bottle of water. "How is he?" he asked, standing in the doorway of the room. "Not good." Mireya didn't even turn toward him. "Where have you been? I called." "Sorry. An important meeting with investors. You know how it is." She knew. She used to know. Now, though, every explanation he gave sounded fake, like a poorly learned role. But she didn't have the energy to think about that now. All her attention was on her father's pale face on the hospital pillow. It was getting dark outside the window. The hospital was slowly falling into the silence of the night, broken only by the footsteps of the nurses on duty and the hum of medical equipment. Mireya sat next to her father, holding his hand, and prayed that the next day would bring relief. She didn't know it was their last night together. The morning brought terrible news. Fernando Arteaga had passed away at dawn, quiet and serene, as if he had fallen asleep. Mireya sat by his side until the last minute, holding his coldening hand. The nurses tried to pull her away, but she didn't move from her seat, looking at her father's peaceful face. Dr. Ramirez personally reported what had happened, his voice full of genuine sympathy. "We did everything we could. His heart was too weak." Mireya nodded mechanically as she listened to the medical details. The hospital staff bustled around her, filling out some paperwork, asking questions that required immediate answers. She answered automatically, not making sense of what was going on. Camila was the first to arrive after hearing the news. She silently hugged her friend, helped her to collect her father's things, which were spread out in the hospital bedside table: a comb, glasses, an unread book. Each item seemed incredibly meaningful, as if it held a piece of his soul. Matthias showed up 2 hours later, out of breath and anxious. "I'm sorry, I was in an important meeting and my phone was dead." Mireya didn't even look at him as she continued to methodically put her father's things in the bag. Her movements were precise, as if rehearsed in advance, as if this mechanical activity helped her not to think about what had happened. The next days turned into an endless series of formalities. It was necessary to organize the funeral, to notify the relatives, to solve many questions. Matthias suddenly took over most of the arrangements, showing an uncommon care. "I'll arrange everything," he was saying, stroking his wife's shoulder. "You need to rest." But Mireya could not rest. She plunged into the funeral preparations with a kind of desperate energy, selecting the casket, discussing the details of the ceremony, making lists of invitees. She stayed up late every night, checking and rechecking all the arrangements. Camila practically took up residence in their home, helping with the preparations. She made Mireya eat, made sure she got some sleep, answered the endless calls of the condolence people. The day of the funeral was overcast. The gray sky hung over the ancient cemetery where they gathered to see Fernando off. Many people came, colleagues, friends, former business partners. Mireya stood by the coffin, dressed in a strict black dress, her face pale and motionless. The priest was giving a mournful eulogy, his words echoing between the old tombstones. Mireya listened to them as if from a distance, mechanically accepting condolences from the endless string of people. Some she barely knew, others were part of her childhood, but now they all seemed equally alien. Matthias stood beside her, supporting her under her arm. His presence should have been comforting, but somehow it made her vaguely uneasy. Every now and then he was distracted by his phone, quickly typing some message. After the ceremony, there was a memorial dinner at her father's favorite restaurant. Mireya sat at the head of the table, barely touching her food. There were muffled conversations all around, memories of the deceased, stories from the past. Fernando was an old-school man, one of his longtime partners was saying. "You don't see people like that anymore. Honest, principled, and very loyal to his family," added another. "Always said family was the most important thing." Mireya listened to these conversations, remembering how her father taught her to ride a bike, how proud he was of her first successes at university, how happy he was when she defended her thesis. He was always there for her, supporting all her endeavors, believing in her more than she believed in herself. In the evening, when the last guests had left, Mireya was alone in the living room. Matthias had gone to bed, saying he was tired. The room was quiet, with only the clock ticking away the time. She sat in her father's chair, breathing in the faint scent of his favorite cologne, which was still preserved in the fabric. The next morning, her father's lawyer, Señor Esteban, called and asked for a meeting. There are important matters that need immediate attention. Mireya made an appointment for the next day. She knew that sooner or later she would have to attend to her father's affairs, but now the very thought of it seemed sacrilegious. Matthias was suddenly interested in the meeting. "Do you want me to come with you? We are talking about important documents after all." "No," she answered, firmer than she intended. "I can manage on my own." Something in his voice alerted her. Too much involvement, too much concern. It didn't sound like his recent behavior. She caught his gaze directed at her, and something alien, calculating, flashed in it. In the evening, Camila called, "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Mireya answered honestly. "It's all a blur." "I can come over." "No, you don't have to. I need to be alone." She spent the rest of the evening sorting through her father's papers she'd picked up from the hospital. Among them were old photographs, documents, notebooks. In one of them she found a short note in his distinctive handwriting. "Not all friends remain friends. Be careful of those who are too insistent in offering help." The phrase made her think. She remembered her father's last words to her at the hospital about being careful. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but Something told her. Her father was trying to warn her of something important. The lawyer's office was located in an old building in the center of town. The solid wooden door with the brass Esteban and Associates sign gave way with a quiet creak. Inside smelled of furniture polish and old books. Mireya walked through the reception area, where a young receptionist immediately rose to meet her. "Senor Esteban is expecting you," she said in a sympathetic tone. "Please accept my condolences." The lawyer's office looked exactly as the office of a man of his profession should. Dark wood paneling on the walls, massive bookcases filled with thick leather-bound volumes, a heavy mahogany desk. Senor Esteban himself, a gray-haired man in an impeccable suit, rose from the desk to greet Mireya. "Please have a seat," he pointed to a leather armchair. "May I offer you some coffee?" Mireya shook her head negatively. Her gaze was fixed on a large folder lying on the table in front of the lawyer. "Your father was a very prudent man," Senor Esteban began, opening the folder. "He updated his will just 2 months ago." He pulled out several documents, laying them out neatly in front of him. "According to your father's last will, you are the sole heir to his entire estate." Mireya listened as the lawyer read out the list. Real estate, including the house where she grew up, shares in several companies, bank accounts. The numbers seemed unreal. She knew her father was a successful businessman, but the scale of his fortune was staggering. "One more thing." Senor Esteban pulled out an envelope. "Your father left a substantial sum in cash. It is kept in a safe deposit box. Here is the key and all the necessary paperwork." Mireya took the envelope, feeling its heaviness in her hands. The lawyer continued to talk about legal formalities, paperwork deadlines, tax obligations. She nodded, barely taking in the meaning of the words. "One last thing." Senor Esteban handed her another envelope smaller. "Your father asked me to give this to you personally. Said it was important." Back home, Mireya found Matias in the living room. He had clearly been waiting for her return, tapping his fingers nervously on the arm of his chair. "How was the meeting?" he asked, trying to hide the impatience in his voice. "Fine." She made her way to the kitchen, feeling her husband following her footsteps. "And what did the lawyer say?" Mireya began to make tea, deliberately stretching each movement. "My father left me an inheritance." "Yeah? What kind of inheritance?" An ingratiating note appeared in his voice. "I haven't figured out all the details yet." She turned back to the cabinet, pulling out a cup. "There's a lot of paperwork. It takes time to go through everything." Matthias stepped closer, putting his hands on her shoulders. "Look, I could help. I have experience in financial matters after all." His touch, once so welcome, was now vaguely unsettling. Mireya released herself gently. "Thank you, but I can manage on my own." Father left clear instructions. The next day she went to the bank. The procedure for accessing the safe deposit box was surprisingly simple. A check of the documents, a signature in the register, and the clerk escorted her into the vault. The contents of the box amazed her. Neatly tied bundles of large denomination bills, some documents, several folders with papers. Everything was meticulously organized, each bundle of money with an inventory. When she returned home, she locked herself in her study. She took out the letter the lawyer had given her. Her father's handwriting, so familiar, so dear, ran along the lines. "Dear Mireya, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer here. I have something important to tell you. For the past few months, I have noticed strange things in the behavior of some of the people around me. Attempts to get information about my assets, persistent offers of help in managing my finances. I don't want to name names, but please be very careful, especially those who show an inordinate interest in the inheritance. I've purposely converted a large portion of my fortune into cash. Keep it in a safe place. Don't trust anyone, not even your closest friends. I know it sounds paranoid, but it's best to be safe. Your loving father. Mireya reread the letter several times. Her father's last words in the hospital, his notes in his notebook, it all added up to a disturbing picture. She looked at the stack of papers she'd brought from the bank. There was a lot to sort through, but first she had to decide where to store the cash. There was a safe in the house, installed when she bought the apartment. It was massive, solid, built into the wall behind the painting in her office. Mireya methodically moved the money and documents, checking every stack, every paper. In the evening, Matthias started talking about the inheritance again. I've been thinking, I have a great idea for an investment. I could put the money into a promising project. What kind of project? Mireya asked, watching his reaction carefully. Well, there's this company. They're developing new technology. The stock should skyrocket in value, he spoke quickly, excitedly. It's a great opportunity for capital appreciation. I'm not ready to make that kind of decision yet, she replied calmly. It's been too little time since the funeral. Matthias frowned, but quickly pulled himself together. Of course, dear. I just wanted to help. Take your time. Think about it. At night, lying in bed, Mireya replayed the events of the last few days in her head. Her husband's sudden concern, his insistent interest in her finances, her strange behavior at the hospital. Her father's warnings no longer seemed paranoid. Something was happening, something not good, and she had to figure out what it was. The morning had been particularly rough. Mireya woke long before dawn, listening to her husband's quiet footsteps in the next room. Matthias was awake again in their shared bedroom, citing a work emergency. Through the thin wall came the muffled sounds of him talking on the phone. She lay motionless, staring into the darkness. Every word, every rustle on the other side made her tense. Matthias spoke too softly to make out individual phrases, but the very tone of his voice seemed foreign, unfamiliar. At breakfast, he started talking about money again. You know, I've done the math. If you invest part of your inheritance in stocks, you could make a serious profit in a year. Mireya stirred her coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl into a maelstrom. I already told you. Now is not the time. But why? An insistent note appeared in his voice. Money has to work. Your father understood that. My father, she emphasized the word, was a very careful man. He never rushed into decisions. Matthias stood up abruptly from the table. You're being unreasonable. You're missing a great opportunity. His reaction only heightened her suspicions. He had never taken such a tone before, always soft, accommodating. Now, however, every conversation about the inheritance turned into a confrontation. After he left, Mireya called Camila. We need to meet, today. They agreed to have lunch at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from familiar places. Camila showed up exactly at the appointed time, elegant as always, but her eyes expressed anxiety. What's wrong? She asked, taking a seat at the table. Mireya looked around, making sure no one was overhearing them. I think there's something wrong with Matthias. He keeps talking about money, insisting on some kind of investment. Maybe he just wants to help? Camila scrutinized her friend's face. No, there's something different here. He's changed, became aggressive, persistent. Mireya pulled out her phone, opened the messages. Look, I happened to see this morning. A message from an unfamiliar number glowed on the screen. All set, waiting for further instructions. Remember the deadline. It could have been work, Camila remarked, but you could hear the doubt in her voice. And this? Mireya showed another message. She suspects nothing. Proceed as planned. Camila frowned. When did you discover this? This morning. He left his phone in the kitchen while he took a shower. I know I shouldn't have looked, but no, you did the right thing. Camila covered her friend's hand with her own. Something is definitely wrong here. They talked for several hours. Mireya talked about her father's letter, about Matthias's strange behavior at the hospital, about his persistent attempts to gain control of the inheritance. He even sleeps separately, she added quietly. Says he doesn't want to disturb my sleep, but he's always talking to someone at night. Camila tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. Have you checked his work phone? No. He always carries it with him. And actually, he's gotten very careful with his phones lately, always clearing his call history. What about his work? Maybe we should go to the office, talk to his co-workers. Mireya shook her head. He used to talk a lot about his co-workers, about projects. Now everything is covered in some kind of mystery. In the evening, when she returned home, she caught Matthias at his laptop. He hurriedly slammed the lid shut when he saw her. You're home early. I had a headache, she lied. Decided to cancel my last appointment. Matthias stood up, walked over to her, tried to hug her. My poor thing. Shall I get you a pill? His concern seemed fake, contrived. Mireya pulled away gently. No, thank you. I just need to rest. She walked to the bedroom, locking the door. A few minutes later, she heard Matthias reopening his laptop, the keys clicking quietly. Then came his muffled voice, another secret phone conversation. She couldn't sleep at night. Her mind was reeling with scraps of conversation, strange messages, her father's warnings. It all added up to a disturbing picture, but something was missing. Some important detail that would tie it all together. In the morning, Matthias brought up the investment conversation again. I've made an appointment with a financial advisor. He'll help us manage our money wisely. What money, Matthias? Mireya looked him straight in the eye. It's my inheritance. I haven't decided how to dispose of it yet. His face contorted for a moment, his eyes glittering with anger. We're family, or don't you trust me anymore? It's not about trust. This just isn't the time for that kind of decision. He stood up abruptly from the table. You know what? Do as you please. But then don't say I didn't offer to help. The front door slammed. Mireya was left alone looking at the unfinished coffee in her husband's cup. A strange white residue was visible at the bottom. She sniffed the cup cautiously. No unusual odor. But her intuition told her something was wrong. She spent the rest of the day in a fog. When she returned from work, she found Matthias rummaging through her desk, papers lying a little differently than she'd left them. In the bathroom, she found a crumpled receipt from the pharmacy. Her husband had never mentioned buying medicine. In the evening, she called Camila again. I think I need help. Serious help. The morning began with an unexpected discovery. Mireya was about to drive to her husband's office. She was determined to finally find out what was going on. Matthias had already left, leaving his day planner on the kitchen table. Usually he never forgot it, always carrying it with him, carefully keeping it out of sight. Mireya carefully opened the leather cover. Inside revealed several business cards, meeting notes, phone numbers. On the last page was an unfamiliar last name, Jimena Ortiz, and next to it a heart, carelessly drawn with a pen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed the office address into the navigator. The building was located in the city's business district, a glass high-rise similar to dozens of others around it. A young girl with perfect makeup sat at the reception desk. Good morning, Mireya tried to smile as naturally as possible. I'm looking for Matias Ubaldo. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. Matias? He doesn't work for us anymore. He quit a week ago. Mireya felt the ground go from under her feet. Quit his job how? Yes, rather abruptly. He wrote a letter of resignation. Didn't you know? And who are you, I beg your pardon? I'm his wife. The girl's face reflected confusion. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just, you thought what? Well, he's been here a lot with another woman, Jimena from the sales department. We all thought they were, The girl fell silent, clearly regretting what she had said. Mireya stood, gripping the reception desk with whitened fingers. "Where can I find this Ximena?" She quit too, same day. On the way home, Mireya stopped at the supermarket, wandered aimlessly between shelves trying to gather her thoughts. Random groceries fell into the basket: a pack of pasta, canned goods, a bottle of wine. The cashier looked sympathetically at her pale face, but said nothing. At home, the first thing she did was to go to her husband's study. She had never allowed herself to go through his things before, but now all barriers had fallen. The desk drawers revealed receipts from expensive restaurants, receipts from a jewelry store. Among the papers was a photograph of a young woman with long, dark hair. On the back was the inscription, "To my beloved from Ximena." That evening she stood at the stove, mechanically stirring pasta sauce. Matthias returned late, smelling of expensive perfume, clearly feminine. "Sorry, an important meeting ran late," he tossed as he passed the kitchen. "Who's the meeting with?" she asked without turning around. "With potential investors, I told you. I'm working on a new project." Lies. Every word he said was a lie. Mireya turned off the stove, leaving an unfinished dinner. "How's it going at the old job?" she asked, entering the living room. Matthias froze for a moment. "Fine. Lots of business as usual." "That's odd. And I was told you quit a week ago." There was a heavy silence in the room. Matthias turned slowly toward her. "Are you following me?" "No. Just thought I'd stop by your work, to meet your co-workers. Ximena, for example." His face contorted. "You had no right to—" "I had no right? Did you have the right to lie to me all this time?" He took a step toward her, but Mireya backed away. "I know everything. About your meetings, about quitting together, about the restaurants and the gifts." Matthias's face changed dramatically. Now before her stood a completely different man, cold, calculating, alien. "Don't make up tall tales. You've gotten paranoid lately." He grinned crookedly. Mireya silently turned around and left for her bedroom, locking the door. A few minutes later she heard Matthias coming out onto the balcony. She stepped closer. His voice, irritated and angry, came through the loose door. "Yes, she found out. No, not everything. What does it matter? In 3 days it will all be over. Yes, at lunchtime, when she's at work. I'll take everything out of the safe, and we'll be gone. Forever." Mireya sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her cell phone in her hands. Her fingers automatically dialed Camila's number. "Come over right away." Her voice sounded unaccustomedly calm. "I think I just found out my husband is planning to rob me." Camila arrived 20 minutes later. Matthias had already left by then, slamming the door loudly. Her friend silently hugged Mireya, helping her into a chair. "Tell me." And Mireya told everything, about the dismissal, about Ximena, about the overheard conversation. With each word, the picture became clearer and scarier. 3 days from now, then? Camila tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the armrest. "We need help. Professional help." "What kind of help?" "I have a lawyer I know, Raul Montenegro. He specializes in just this kind of case." Mireya shook her head. "But what can he do? I have no proof." "We'll find proof. The important thing is to protect you and your money. Believe me, Raul knows what to do." They agreed to meet with the lawyer tomorrow morning. Camila insisted on staying the night. She was afraid to leave her friend alone in such a state. Late at night, lying awake, Mireya remembered her father's last words to her. He had warned her, tried to keep her safe. She realized now that his premonition had been correct. Her husband, the man she had lived with for 8 years, had turned out to be a traitor, ready to steal not only her trust, but her father's inheritance as well. Behind the wall, in his office, Matthias was on the phone again. Now she could distinguish new intonations in his voice, hard, commanding, not at all like the ones she had known before. The mask had finally fallen, revealing his true face. Raul Montenegro worked in a small office on the first floor of an old building. No signs on the door, no fancy furniture inside, just a massive desk, a few chairs and filing cabinets. The lawyer himself appeared to be a gaunt, middle-aged man with an attentive, tenacious gaze. "So," he said after hearing Mireya's story, "your husband is planning a burglary, a premeditated one which makes his potential punishment much heavier." Mireya sat motionless with her hands folded in her lap. Camila nestled next to her, ready to support her friend at any moment. "But we have no proof," Mireya objected. "Only overheard conversation." Raul tapped his pencil on the table. "There will be evidence. The main thing is to prepare the trap intelligently." He pulled several folders from his desk drawer. "I had a similar case 2 years ago. A husband tried to embezzle his wife's inheritance. We organized an excellent swap operation at the time." "A switch?" Mireya pitched forward. "Yes. Replaced real money and documents with fake ones. When the criminal tried to steal them, we had all the evidence of his intentions, but the real valuables remained safe." Camila nodded approvingly. "Sounds reasonable. But where to get the counterfeit money?" "I have connections." Raul smiled slightly. "Fake money for theater productions. Looks like the real thing, but legally it's not fake. Each bill has special markings on it." He opened the safe, pulled out a stack of bills. "Here, look at this. You can't even tell the difference by touch." Mireya carefully took the bill. Indeed, the quality was excellent. Only the tiny inscription on the back gave away its theatrical origin. "So what do we need to do?" "For starters, we need an accurate plan of your apartment, the location of the safe, security cameras if there are any. Then we'll draw up a detailed timeline. The main thing is that everything must look natural. Your husband mustn't suspect a switch." They spent the next hour discussing the details of the operation. Raul wrote something down in his notebook, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His professionalism and calmness had a calming effect. "What if he notices the switch early?" Mireya asked. "He won't," replied the lawyer confidently. "First of all, we use the highest quality fakes. Second, judging from your story, he plans to act quickly, grab and run. He won't have time to scrutinize the bills." Back home, Mireya found a note from Matthias. He'd left for a business meeting and would be back late. Now she knew what it meant. Probably another date with Jimena, planning their escape. She methodically walked around the apartment, taking pictures on her phone of everything she could use for the plan. The safe behind the painting in the study, the spare keys, the location of the outlets for the security cameras. Every detail could be important. Camila stayed behind to help with the preparations. They were sitting in the kitchen when the call from Raul came through. "Everything is ready," he reported. "I'll bring the materials tomorrow morning at 10. Prepare a detailed inventory of the contents of the safe." All night Mireya couldn't sleep. In the next room, Camila was quietly snoozing on the couch and she lay staring at the ceiling. Her mind was spinning with scraps of memories. The first meeting with Matthias, their wedding, traveling together. How could he have changed so much? Or had he always been like this? She just didn't want to see it. In the morning, she and Camila carefully counted the contents of the safe. Every bundle of money, every document was entered into a special spreadsheet. Raul showed up at exactly the right time, a bulky briefcase in his hands. "Here's everything you need," he said, laying out wads of fake money on the table. Plus, watermarked documents. Looks like real securities. They spent the next few hours preparing, laying out the fake money exactly as the real money was laid out. They copied the layout of the documents. Raul showed them how to properly set up the miniature surveillance cameras. "The key is to stay calm," he instructed. "Behave as you normally would. No sudden changes in behavior." Mireya nodded, memorizing every word. Her hands no longer trembled. A strange calm had come over her, as if she had finally gained control of the situation. Camila busied herself with organizing the storage of the real money and documents. Raoul had advised against keeping them at home. Too risky. They rented a safe deposit box on the other side of town, putting it in Camila's name. "Now for the hard part," Raoul said when the basic preparations were done. "We need to wait for them to come for the loot themselves. No amateurishness, no rush." In the evening, Matthias returned. He was unusually animated and even tried to make conversation at dinner. "How was your day?" "Fine," Mireya replied, trying to keep her voice casual. "Did some paperwork. You might want to think about my offer after all." "About investing?" She shook her head. "No, Matthias. I've already told you. It's out of the question." His eyes glittered with anger for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together. "As you wish. I just wanted to help." Later, lying in bed, Mireya heard him talking on the phone on the balcony again. "Yes, everything is ready. No, she doesn't suspect anything. In 2 days, it'll all be over." She clenched her fists, digging her nails into her palms. His every word, every gesture was seen differently now. How could she have been so blind? How had she not noticed this falseness before? In the morning, she called Raoul. "He's planning to act in 2 days." "Great," she could hear the professional satisfaction in the lawyer's voice. "Then we have time to prepare the final part of the operation." The next day began with a thorough review of all the details of the plan. Raoul arrived early in the morning while Matthias was still asleep. The lawyer methodically inspected the cameras installed the day before, checking the quality of the recording on his tablet. "Excellent," he murmured, adjusting the angle of one of the cameras. "The safe comes into full frame. You'll be able to see their every move." Mireya stood nearby, watching his actions. Her fingers nervously rubbed the waistband of her house robe. They continued their preparations. Raoul pulled a folder of documents from his briefcase. "Here's the statement to the police, already prepared. We'll just put in the date and time when it happens." Mireya ran her eyes over the text. The dry legal language described her family tragedy as a run-of-the-mill criminal case, attempted theft, prior conspiracy, use of official position. "And these," Raoul handed her another folder, "are the divorce papers. You can file those too as soon as you're apprehended." Camila showed up around noon, bringing fresh pastries and a thermos of coffee. "How are you doing?" "Everything's going according to plan," Raoul replied, not taking his eyes off the next camera setup. They sat in the kitchen, discussing the details of the upcoming operation. Raoul was drawing diagrams explaining who should be where when Matthias and his accomplice appeared. "The main thing is to let them get their act together," the lawyer emphasized. "We need to document the attempted theft. If we scare them off prematurely, they might turn away." Mireya listened, mechanically stirring the cooled coffee. The reality of what was happening was not in her mind. It seemed like a bad dream that you were about to wake up from. After lunch, they checked the safe. Raoul counted the fake money again, checked the markings on each packet. Perfect. Even I wouldn't know the difference at first glance. The real money and documents were already in the safe deposit box, safely hidden from greedy hands. Mireya remembered how her father had taught her to be careful with her finances. Money attracts problems as well as opportunities. In the evening, after Raoul left, Matthias showed up. He smelled of expensive alcohol and feminine perfume. He didn't even try to hide it. Apparently, he thought it wouldn't matter in a couple days. "Good meeting?" Mireya asked without looking at him. "Great," he plopped into a chair, putting his feet up on the coffee table. "Everything's going just right." She noticed his gaze returning time and again to the office where the safe was hidden behind a painting. His eyes read ill-concealed greed. At night, Mireya could not sleep again. The darkness made the loneliness especially acute. Somewhere in the other bedroom, Matthias was snoring, the man she had once loved but now feared and despised. The morning brought new worries. She had to check the charge on the cameras, make sure all the recording equipment was working properly. Raoul arrived again at dawn, now with the police documentation. "I've made arrangements with reliable people," he reported. "They'll be waiting nearby for my signal. As soon as your husband and his accomplice make a move, we'll get them." Camila brought new clothes for Mireia, a strict suit for the university. "You must look your usual self. No signs of excitement or anxiety." They rehearsed the upcoming day several times. Mireia was to leave for the university, ostensibly for lectures. In reality, to return through the back door and wait in the neighboring apartment that Raoul had rented specifically for the operation. "What if they decide to act sooner?" Mireia asked. "They won't," Raoul replied confidently. "I've studied the psychology of such criminals. They always act according to a prearranged plan. It gives them confidence." By evening, all the preparations were finished. Camila stayed the night. She and Mireia sat in the kitchen for a long time, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. "You know," Camila said, looking at her friend, "you're good for not breaking down. Another person in your shoes would have—" Mireia shook her head. "I have no choice. I have to protect what my father left me. It's not just money. It's his trust, his memory." Before going to bed, she went into the study, looking at the safe behind the painting. Inside lay traitor bait. Fake money, fake documents. Tomorrow the final act of this sordid story would play out here. Matthias came back at midnight. She could hear him talking on the phone in the bathroom, muffling his voice with the sound of the water. "Yes, tomorrow. At lunchtime. As agreed. Everything will be ours, honey. Just be patient for a while." Mireia lay in bed, staring into the darkness. The denouement was only hours away. The university auditorium seemed unaccustomedly quiet. Mireia stood behind the lectern, absent-mindedly thumbing through the pages of her outline. The students were concentrating on the lecture, not noticing the professor's strange state. Only Manuela cast concerned glances at her from time to time. "Thus, the impact of social change on 20th century literature," Mireia stammered, having lost the thread of her reasoning. Manuela immediately raised her hand. "Professor Arteaga, may I ask you a clarifying question?" This simple question helped Mireia gather her thoughts back to the familiar rhythm of the lecture. She nodded gratefully to the student as she continued her explanation. Work had always been her salvation, helping to distract her from her personal problems. After class, she lingered in the empty classroom. By this time tomorrow, it would all be over. Her life would be divided into before and after. Her phone vibrated. A message from Raoul. "All systems checked. They're working properly." Manuela caught up with her in the hallway. "Professor Arteaga, are you all right?" "Yes, of course," Mireia tried to smile. "Just a little tired. Maybe you should take a little vacation, after everything that's happened." Mireia shook her head. "No, work keeps me going." On the way home, she stopped by the supermarket. Methodically, she put the usual groceries in her basket. Everything should look the same as usual. Milk, bread, vegetables for a salad. Matthias loved her salads. She sharply reprimanded herself. She couldn't think about the past, couldn't let memories soften her resolve. At home, she was in for a surprise. Matthias had prepared dinner. He'd set the table, lit candles, opened a bottle of wine. "Thought I'd make you happy," he said with a smile that now seemed fake. "You've been working so hard lately." Mireia looked at the table set, at the flickering candles, at her husband's once-born face. It all seemed like a mockery, like the last act in a play he'd been playing all these years. "Thank you." She sat down at the table, trying to make her voice sound natural. "That's very nice of you." Dinner turned into elaborate torture. Matthias talked about some projects, future plans, as if he wasn't going to steal her money and disappear tomorrow. She kept the conversation going, smiling in the right places, playing the role of an unsuspecting wife. After dinner, Camila called, "How are you?" "Fine." Maria stepped out onto the balcony, away from her husband's sensitive ears. He arranged a romantic dinner. "God, what a rascal!" Her friend's voice was filled with indignation. "He's trying to put your guard down." "I know, but I won't give in." That evening she sat in her office for a long time, ostensibly checking student papers. In reality, she was checking the cameras, recording devices, the location of the counterfeit money in the safe one last time. Everything had to be perfect. Matthias stopped by around 11. "Aren't you going to bed yet?" "No, I need to finish up with a test." She pointed to a stack of notebooks. "I have class tomorrow afternoon. I want to return the papers to the students." "After lunch?" Something predatory flashed in his eyes. "Are you staying long?" "The usual. I'll be back for dinner." He nodded and walked out. A few minutes later, she heard his muffled voice from the bedroom, another secret conversation with his mistress. He wasn't even trying to hide much now. At night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, going over the minute details of the plan in her mind. Tomorrow she would supposedly go to work. In reality, she would hide in a neighboring apartment with Raoul. Cameras would record the criminal's every move. The police would wait for a signal. Matthias was asleep next to her. His breath, so familiar, so dear, was now only disgusting. How could he? 8 years of life together, thousands of shared memories, plans, hopes, and it all turned out to be a lie. The morning began as usual. Maria got up first, prepared breakfast. Matthias appeared in the kitchen in his favorite blue robe she had given him for his last birthday. That smells good." He tried to hug her, but she deftly dodged, pretending to get the plates. At breakfast, he was unusually talkative, even cheerful. He told some office story, laughed at his own jokes, as if he hadn't been the one whispering robbery plans into the phone a few hours ago. "Sure you won't change your mind about investing?" he asked, as if, by the way. "The offer still stands." Maria shook her head. "No, Matthias, I've already decided." "Oh well." He shrugged with feigned indifference. "At least I tried." Getting ready for work, she deliberately fiddled with her clothes for a long time, choosing a suit. Matthias glanced impatiently at his watch. He was clearly anxious to be alone. "Don't forget, I won't be back until after dinner," she said as she stood in the doorway. Yeah. Have a good day." He practically shooed her out of the apartment. Raoul was already waiting for her on the landing. They silently made their way up to the floor above, to the apartment where they would be watching from. The lawyer unfolded his laptop, checked the images from the cameras. "Now we wait," he said, settling into a chair. "I think they'll show up around noon." Maria sat down next to him, never taking her eyes off the screen. The monitor showed her office, the safe behind the painting, part of the living room. Everything looked so ordinary, so familiar. But soon this peaceful picture would change forever. The apartment a floor above was small and empty, just a few folding chairs and an old desk where Raoul had set up his surveillance equipment. Maria sat motionless, staring at the laptop screen where the live feed from the cameras was streaming. Matthias appeared in the footage around 10 in the morning. He methodically walked around the apartment, checking all the rooms, as if he wanted to make sure his wife was really gone. Then he took out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Yes, you can come over. She's at work until tonight." No problem. "Yes, I'll meet you at the front door." Raoul made notes in his notebook, writing down the time of each action. Nearby lay a recorder on, recording all conversations that the hidden microphones picked up. "Do you think she'll show up soon?" Maria asked, nervously adjusting the collar of her blouse. "Judging by his demeanor within the next hour," replied the lawyer, not taking his eyes off the monitor. Matthias, meanwhile, paced around the apartment, glancing at his watch occasionally. He changed into a dark suit as if he were going to a business meeting. Every few minutes he went to the window, looking out at the street below. At 11:30 his phone rang again. "You're on your way up? Great, I'm waiting downstairs." He left the apartment and the screen showed only empty rooms for a while. Mireya felt the tension building with every minute of waiting. "Take it easy," Raoul put a hand on her shoulder. "Everything is going according to plan." 10 minutes later, the door opened again. Matthias entered first, followed by a tall woman in an elegant black dress. Jimena Ortiz appeared to be exactly as Mireya had envisioned her, svelte, confident with a predatory grace in every movement. "Honey, are you sure she's not coming back?" Jimena's voice sounded low and velvety. "Absolutely. She has lectures until the evening on Thursdays." Matthias put his arm around his lover's waist. "We have plenty of time." They walked to the living room. Jimena looked around curiously, picking up pictures, trinkets. "So this is where you've lived all these years?" You could hear the poorly concealed jealousy in her voice. "Never mind," Matthias yanked his shoulder impatiently. "Soon, it will all be a thing of the past." They headed for the study. Mireya involuntarily pitched forward when she saw Matthias pulling a painting off the wall, opening the safe. "I peeked at the code a week ago," he said as he turned the disc. "She doesn't even realize how careless she is with valuable information." Jimena stood beside him, peering over his shoulder impatiently. "How much should be on there?" "More than enough for a new life." Matthias entered the last digit of the combination. The safe door opened with a quiet click. Inside, stacks of money and folders of documents were neatly stacked, just as Mireya had laid them out under Raoul's guidance. "This is it," Jimena whispered, running her finger along the edge of the nearest stack. "Our future." Matthias pulled out a pre-prepared bag, began methodically transferring the contents of the safe into it. "Hurry up," Jimena hurried him. "We have a plane to catch." "Don't worry, honey." He worked briskly and carefully. "We have tickets for the evening flight. There's plenty of time." Raoul commented quietly into the recorder, capturing every detail: time, actions, conversations. Mireya stared at the screen, unmoving. Her husband, the man she had trusted for 8 years of her life, was methodically robbing her without even the slightest remorse. "Don't forget the papers," Jimena reminded her. "We can't sell the shares without them." Matthias nodded, pulling out the folders. "All things considered, sweetheart, in a week we'll already be basking on a beach somewhere in the Caribbean." He was just closing the bag when Raoul turned to Mireya. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded. The lawyer pulled out his cell phone, dialed a number. "Go ahead." A moment later, quick footsteps were heard in the hallway. Mireya and Raoul came down the stairs, trying to move silently. The policemen were already waiting at the apartment door. Everything happened very quickly. The door opened without knocking. The police had a duplicate key. Matthias and Jimena didn't even have time to react. "Freeze! Hands up!" The policeman's voice echoed through the apartment. Matthias dropped his bag, money scattered on the floor. Jimena shrieked, trying to hide behind his back. At that moment, Mireya and Raoul entered the apartment. "Don't move," the policeman commanded, handcuffing Matthias. "You're under arrest for attempted grand larceny." Matthias's face contorted with rage when he saw his wife. You knew everything?" "Yes," Mireya replied calmly. "And that money is fake, by the way. Theater props." Jimena, who was also being handcuffed, broke into hysterical laughter. "No way, you're lying." Raoul pulled some documents out of his briefcase. "Here's an expert report on the authenticity of the bills. And here is a warrant for your arrest. All your conversations are recorded. Your actions are videotaped. The policemen began to draw up a report. One of them methodically collected the bills scattered on the floor, placing each one in a separate evidence bag. Matthias stood motionless, staring at the floor. All his self-confidence was gone, leaving only the pathetic shell of the man Mireia had once loved. "Why?" she asked, looking at her husband. "Why did you do it?" He lifted his eyes, which now read only fear. I thought it would be easy. Take the money and start a new life." "A new life?" Mireia shook her head. "On stolen money? On betrayal?" Chimina twitched in her handcuffs. "Don't listen to her. She's just jealous of our happiness." Raoul put his hand on Mireia's shoulder. "Let's go. The police will deal with them themselves." They walked out into the hallway. Behind them they could hear the voices of the police reading out the rights of the detainees, the sound of handcuffs snapping shut, the muffled sobs of Jimena. The day that had begun so normally was ending with the collapse of her family life. But in a strange way, Mireia felt not grief, but relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The police were finishing processing the crime scene. A plainclothes officer carefully photographed the bills scattered on the floor, the open safe, the bag Matthias had dropped. Each item was carefully labeled and packed in clear evidence bags. A second policeman sat at a table in the living room filling out a report. His pen glided quickly across the paper, recording the witnesses' statements. Raoul stood beside him, scrutinizing every word. Matthias and Jimena were in separate rooms. They had been deliberately separated so that they could not harmonize their testimony. Muffled sobs came from the bedroom where Jimena was being held. Matthias sat in the study, motionless and silent like a waxen figure. Mireia watched, leaning against the door jamb. Her apartment, so familiar and dear, had become a crime scene. There were uniformed men scurrying everywhere, cameras clicking, official phrases being spoken. "Señora Arteaga," the young investigator addressed her. "We need your testimony. Please sit down." She lowered herself into a chair, machine tugging her skirt. The investigator pulled out a new form, checked the tape recorder. "Would you please tell us how you learned of the crime you were preparing?" Mireia began to speak. Her voice sounded surprisingly calm as she described the overheard conversation on the balcony, her husband's strange behavior, the evidence found. The investigator took notes quickly, occasionally asking for details. At that moment, Matthias's voice came from the office. "I demand a lawyer. This is all a provocation." Of course," the policeman replied calmly. "A lawyer is on his way. In the meantime, will you tell me where you plan to flee with the stolen money?" Mireia flinched at that question. They were really planning to disappear, to start a new life somewhere far away, built on the money stolen from her, on the inheritance of her father, who had always cared so much for his daughter. From the bag Matthias had dropped, the police continued to retrieve evidence. Stacks of fake money, forged documents, and, which surprised even Mireia, 2 airline tickets to Brazil for an evening flight. "They planned the whole thing," Raoul commented, looking at the tickets. "Even thought out the departure route." Jimena was led out of the bedroom. She was no longer crying. Now her face expressed anger and despair. When she saw Mireia, she stopped. "Are you satisfied? Have you ruined our happiness?" Mireia stared silently at the woman who had helped her husband plan the robbery. Jimena was beautiful with that predatory beauty that attracts and repels at the same time. "Come in, Señora Ortiz." The policeman nudged Jimena lightly toward the exit. "There will be time to talk at the station." Matthias was led out next. He walked with his head down, but at the door he suddenly stopped. "Mireia, I didn't mean for things to turn out this way." "Really?" She looked into his eyes. "How did you want it to go? Robbing me and running off with your mistress is better?" He twitched as if from a slap. "You don't understand. We could have been happy. That money, that money is my father's inheritance," Mireya interrupted him. "A man who loved me and cared for me, unlike you." The policeman gently but insistently nudged Matthias toward the exit. Their colleagues were already waiting in the corridor, ready to escort the detainees to the station. Raoul approached Mireya, holding out a glass of water. "Have a drink. You did well." She accepted the glass but did not drink. She watched the police take Matthias and Jimena away, put them in different cars, and turn on the sirens. The investigator checked the report again. "Señora Arteaga, you will have to come to the station tomorrow to give an official statement. Today's protocol is only a preliminary record of the facts." Mireya nodded. She wished everyone would leave soon, leave her alone in the empty apartment. But the police work wasn't over yet. The forensics team continued their examination, now more detailed. They checked the fingerprints on the safe, photographed the footprints on the floor, collected the smallest evidence. Their every move was like a polished dance, professional, methodical, unemotional. "We'll need the surveillance footage," the investigator said, turning to Raoul. "Sure." The lawyer pulled out a thumb drive. "It's all here, both the pre-trial conversations and the moment of the crime itself." Camila showed up toward evening when the main police work was already done. She brought a thermos of hot tea and sandwiches. "You must eat," she said insistently, spreading the food out on the kitchen table. "It's been a hard day." Mireya obediently sat down at the table, but a piece wouldn't go down her throat. She chewed mechanically, unable to taste. Matthias's face was still in front of her eyes, his confused look when he realized he'd been caught. "What are you thinking about?" Camila asked, watching her friend. "About how easily life falls apart," Mireya replied quietly. 8 years of marriage, so many plans, so many hopes, and it all turned out to be a lie. Raoul, who was gathering his papers, paused. "Don't blame yourself. You were the victim of a carefully planned crime. They've been preparing for this for a long time." "I know." Mireya stood up from the table. "But that doesn't make it any easier." She walked over to the window. It was already dark outside, the streetlights were lit. The police cars had long since left, taking away the arrestees. Life went on around them as if nothing had happened. Raoul put the last documents in his briefcase. "I expect you at the station at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll be present at the deposition as your attorney." "Thank you." Mireya turned to him. "Thanks for everything." He nodded and walked out, leaving her and Camila alone. Her friend began clearing the table, habitually finding the place of each item. She'd been in this house often enough to know where things lay. "Why don't we go to my place?" she suggested. "You shouldn't stay here alone." Mireya shook her head. "No, I can manage. I need to get used to the new reality." A new reality. Those words echoed in the empty apartment, a reality where she was alone again, where the person she trusted most in the world turned out to be a traitor, where every corner of the house reminded her of 8 years of a life together that had turned out to be a skillful set. The police station greeted Mireya with the usual bustle of early morning. Officers on duty were poring over papers, phones were ringing, and someone was loudly discussing a recent arrest in a nearby neighborhood. Raoul was already waiting for her in the lobby, impeccably dressed with the invariable leather briefcase in his hands. "Good morning." He rose to meet her. "How are you feeling?" Mireya shrugged. She'd barely slept that night, turning over the events of yesterday in her head. Every detail, every moment crashed into her memory with painful clarity. They were led into the investigator's office, a small room with yellow walls and a massive desk piled with files. The investigator, the same young man who had drawn up the report yesterday, nodded affably. "Have a seat, Señora Arteaga. We have a long conversation to have." She lowered herself into the hard chair, straightened her skirt. Raoul settled down beside her, spreading out the papers in front of him. "So," the investigator switched on the tape recorder, "let's start at the beginning. When did you first suspect something amiss?" Mireya spoke for almost an hour, methodically reconstructing the chronology of events. Her husband's strange behavior after her father's death, his persistent attempts to gain control of the inheritance, the overheard conversation on the balcony. The investigator typed rapidly on the computer, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Now tell me more about yesterday," he asked, opening a new file. She described everything: how she'd faked leaving for work, how she'd watched through the cameras, how Matthias had brought Jimena into the house. Every word was hard to say, as if it was draining her of her strength. In the next room, Matthias was being interrogated. Scraps of phrases occasionally broke through the thin wall as he excused himself, demanded a lawyer, or tried to make it look like a misunderstanding. "Don't listen," Raoul said quietly, noticing her flinch at every familiar sound. "Focus on the testimony." The investigator pulled out the physical evidence: fake money, documents, airline tickets. Each item had to be described, its significance in the case explained. "Did they buy these tickets in advance?" clarified the investigator. "Yes, judging by the date, a week before the crime," Raoul replied. "That proves prior conspiracy." Footsteps were heard in the hallway, bringing Jimena in for questioning. She walked past the open door with her head held proudly high. Her long hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, but even so she managed to maintain some predatory dignity. "Señora Arteaga," the investigator handed her a new form. "Sign here and here. This is an official theft report." Mireya signed, trying not to think about the fact that every stroke of the pen brought Matthias closer to a prison sentence. He deserved punishment, she knew that, but some part of her soul still remembered the happy moments of their life together. "Now for the technical side of the case." The investigator turned the monitor toward them. "These are the surveillance tapes. We need to capture every moment." On the screen, the events of yesterday unfolded silently. Here's Matthias checking the apartment. Here he meets Jimena. Here they go to the safe together. Every movement, every gesture had to be commented on for the record. In the neighboring office, voices rose. It seemed that Jimena began to hysterical. Her screams broke through the wall. "It's all her. She set us up on purpose. Matthias loves me, not her." The investigator wrinkled his nose. "I apologize. Why don't we take a break?" Mireya shook her head. "No, let's finish." They continued their work. Raoul methodically recorded every word in his notebook, occasionally inserting legal comments. His calmness and professionalism had a calming effect. Toward lunchtime, another officer came into the office. "The detainees are being transferred to the detention center. Are the protocols ready?" "Almost." The investigator handed Mireya the last sheet. "All that's left is to sign the final document." She picked up a pen, but her hand froze over the paper. Somewhere in the hallway, footsteps sounded. Apparently, they were leading the arrestees. The sound of handcuffs, muffled voices, commands from the escort. "Sign," Raoul said softly. "This is the last formality." Mireya signed. The crisp letters of her last name seemed to draw a line under her past life. The investigator took the document, filed it in a folder. "What now?" she asked, rising from her chair. "Now the investigation begins," Raoul replied. "But your active participation ends there. Law enforcement works next." They stepped out into the hallway. Camila was standing at the exit of the station. She had come to support her friend. She had a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches in her hands. "I thought you hadn't had breakfast," she said, holding out the food. Mireya gratefully accepted the thermos. The hot coffee burned her lips, but the sensation was almost pleasant. It brought her back to reality, pulled her out of the daze of the last few hours. It was sunny outside. A normal fall day, people were hurrying about their business, cars were making noise. No one knew that the story of a single betrayal had just ended at the police station building. Raoul shook their hands. "I'll keep you posted on the case. If you need my help, call me anytime." He walked away, leaving him and Camila on the steps of the station. Her friend took Mireia under her arm. "Let's go to my place. You shouldn't go back to that apartment." Mireia nodded. Home really didn't feel like going home. Too many memories, too much pain lurked within those walls.